How's everybody today? Everybody get a good meal last night? Enjoy the great entertainment that Dallas has to offer? I know I did. Enjoyed it. Well, I appreciate everybody being here today. We have a great crowd. It's always good to be in front of our advocates, our partners, our stakeholders in the world of rail. We have great turnout. Looks like we have representation from a lot of our Class 1 and short line railroads. We appreciate you being here today. Thought I would take a little different tact kind of this year and with this kind of opening remark, kind of set the tone, I think, in the stage for this conference today. We're really at a point where a lot of change in the business community and the dynamics of what's going on with rail, the economics behind it. We have political dynamics that are changing and are following a non-regular playbook this year, as you see. So I figured it would be a real good time to stop and talk about really what is rail. It sounds like a really dumb fundamental question, but let's pull back and start talking about what is rail, what does it really mean to Texas, and then really talk about what our roles are as the private industry that are freight rail operators, the role of government, and the role that you as advocates play. And really kind of set the tone for how we move forward so that we can all seem to be on the same page. And the one thing I always have picked up in working in government is that it's very hard to get people together to circle the wagons and shoot outward. We tend to circle the wagons and shoot inward. And so the idea of my presentation is talk a little bit about making sure everybody has the kind of same assumption set, and we're talking off a kind of common set of plans so that we can advance movement of rail in the state of Texas. So let's see if I can make a clicker work. Maybe not. Is it left, right, up, down? Okay, here we go. So just to kind of set the stage, and I've got one of these fitness counters, so I'm going to walk so that I get credit. My goal is to beat my daughter who has a similar device, so I'm going to have to pace a little bit so I can cheat. So don't tell her. But wanted to talk first about, let's really talk about what is rail. And really, rail in Texas is freight, and it's the heart of the economy. It's all about the money. It's all about moving people. We're very fortunate in Texas. We have 3 Class 1 railroads. I think at least 2 of them are here today. I see French with BNSF, Jerry with UP's here in the audience. I'm not sure if Kevin or anybody from KCS is here, but we have a very robust Class 1 freight partners in the state, as well as over 40 plus short lines. I was very fortunate to get to meet with the Short Line Association yesterday and kind of gave a similar kind of talk yesterday about really where we are and what we want to try to do. The fascinating thing that I think people don't really get is that rail in the state of Texas is very prevalent. 10,000 plus miles, moving lots of goods and having 5 international border crossings, more than anywhere any one state has. So freight is moving through to our state in tremendous numbers and volumes. See on the chart, talking about 200 million tons of freight. Lots and lots and lots of volume. Start thinking about that, all those millions of tons. What if the railroads were not doing business in our state? Those are all on trucks. You're talking millions and millions of tons of goods and services that are not having to use the roadway. That's significant. Because if you think traffic is bad now, imagine if we dumped all that freight on the highway network. So you got to think of it from that standpoint. You have a rail industry that has tremendous employees that work in our state, contribute to the economy, pay taxes. Very important to understand and remember and talk about that. So freight provides the lifeblood that helps, the way I look at it, without BNSF, without UP, without our short lines, I don't get cheap bread at Walmart. You have to look at it from the first mile to the last mile. Then somebody will say, well, Eric, what about passenger service? We need to talk about passenger service. Well, you're right. But I think we need to be grounded in what passenger service is right now in the state of Texas. And it's really limited and it's provided by Amtrak. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more here in some of the initiatives we talk about. But Amtrak is the one that is the service provider so far and right now in the state of Texas. I think Mr. Keith may be talking a little bit later today and may change that dynamic of who is the operators in the state of Texas. We'll see. So we've painted this picture. We got 10,000 miles of rail. We got 200 million tons moving through the state. You start looking at this over time of kind of the picture of rail, and you say, wow, this network is supporting a lot of movement that keeps traffic off our roadways. It talked about the millions of tons of cargo. You start talking about 500,000 people that are moving to and through Texas on Amtrak. And you're talking about a lot of reduction of carloads on the roadway. You start looking at not just that movement and that value from that, you also have to understand that railroads are a very intensive, capital-intensive business. The freight railroads spend tremendous amount of money in Texas. I think in the slide you see here, the past 4 or 5 years, there's been several $1 billion invested in Texas by freight railroads. That's money that they didn't have to spend, but they did in Texas to invest in their network that we reap the benefits from. Freight railroads are so important that we've actually been able to get some success by investing state money in them. The state owns, as everybody's aware, the South Orient out in West Texas. We've put over $26 million in that railroad. What that $26 million has done is increase carloads from a couple of hundred to over 26,000 carloads of moving sand and materials out in West Texas. That's probably had a 3 to 4 time multiplier in economic development opportunity and tax base to West Texas economy. So again, investments in rail have a multiplier that are beneficial to the state of Texas. Unfortunately, this is the public perception of rail. I'm stuck at a crossing. So when you're an elected official, usually the first time they hear about rail, it's not that, hey, they're keeping millions of trucks off the road. Hey, they're investing $4 billion in the state of Texas. They're hearing about how they're blocking a crossing. So all those good things that the industry does, all the good things that you're doing, but your perception is this: you're my problem, not my solution. And we need to work towards that. Because again, this is what is the barrier to investment, barrier to goodwill, barrier to getting a better world-class system, is this public perception. So, the other thing that always kind of gets me is people, oh, Eric, you work for TxDOT. It's a multi-billion-dollar agency. Why don't you do more rail investment? Well, that's a fair question. Well, I see those guys in Connecticut, and they're doing grant programs and all that sort of stuff. Well, Texas is a little different than Connecticut or California. We have a constitution that limits our funding stream primarily to roads and bridges. So that's a little different than some of our other states. But also, I think there's a very different respect in Texas for private industry, and that rail is different than highway projects. Highway, the state of Texas owns it, we operate it, it's ours. Railroads are primarily owned by the private sector. So the idea really needs to be thinking about, well, what would be a valuable role for government in a primarily private sector environment? And so that's what we've been thinking about, is how do we work in that kind of environment? And what we've really come to do and start to strive to do is really, the key word for us is facilitation. As you saw, we have 3 Class 1 railroads, 40 plus short lines. They do business, and sometimes they don't talk to each other, surprisingly. And they tend to have problems that are unique to themselves most of the time. But there's also problems of common nature, where they intersect, where they're running joint operations, or they're causing those block crossings sometimes. And so that's where our role really becomes, is that we could be the facilitator to start the discussion with the railroads on things that are probably in their best interest, but collectively or individually they would never look at themselves. So that's where we've been striving to kind of work on to provide value. And just a kind of couple of examples of that, everybody in the Dallas-Fort Worth area probably knows or have heard the term Tower 55, right? Basically, we have in Fort Worth the highway equivalent of 2 railroads at a 4-way stop. Working with both of the Class 1s there, the MPO here in town, local communities, worked together to come up with a solution, was able to raise over $100 million to build a project. Is Gil Wilson around? Gil, stand up for a second. This is the part of the program where I get to embarrass Gil Wilson. It's always fun. My goal is to see if he will stroke out on me. But Gil, though, in all seriousness, we have to thank Gil for putting that project together, working with the railroads. Because of Gil's efforts, the state of Texas, through the State Association of Highway and Transportation Officials, won the President's Award for our work on Tower 55. So everybody, I'd like to give a round of applause to Gil Wilson. As much as I kid him, probably the hardest working and most innovative guy in state government right now. So I appreciate his good work on projects like this, and hopefully he will help us win yet more President Awards in the future, sans the stroking out. So thank you, Gil. Appreciate it. But Tower 55 is a very interesting story and philosophy that we're following. Facilitating the Neches River Bridge. Not sure many people have heard about it. But you've got 3 railroads using a single-span, turn-of-the-century bridge. So not just a bottleneck in Beaumont, it's a bottleneck when you look at the statewide freight network in Texas, but also in the national network. And what we're doing is we acquired some federal money to do an environmental assessment. We're getting the 3 railroads together, the local communities, and see if there's a way to improve the situation there to eliminate bottlenecks now and in the future. And that's hopefully Gil's next President's Award that he's going to win for us, because I think there's a great opportunity there for the results of our spending a little bit of money to study and facilitate a discussion to reap benefits from leveraging federal, state monies that may be available for economic development and contributions from the freight railroads. It's going to be a fascinating project as we move forward. I think the other thing you see is where are those critical bottlenecks? The border is very much one of those. We're hoping to start working today, in the coming year, on a project in Laredo, helping to look at creating a master plan. We have, again, 2 major railroads down there who have unique system requirements. How do we get them to work together with the community in Laredo to come up with a master plan for short, medium, and long-term improvements that will improve border fluidity, but also help the communities? Because if you saw my picture of the block crossings, that's a regular occurrence in Laredo. So we want to work to help solve that. But it's not just facilitation of freight projects. We're working right now on behalf of this region on probably one of the most, probably is the only active other EIS that is run by a governmental agency in the United States. That is the Dallas-Fort Worth high-speed rail project. Is Chad here? Chad Coburn, everybody, is our project manager for that project, and he's running probably one of the most unique projects right now in the country, trying to bring governmental assistance to work on a project that could connect to a purely private high-speed rail initiative that you're going to hear a little bit about later in the day. But Chad's been doing phenomenal work in getting together. We're using and leveraging ARA money. So this gentleman is probably the most stressed out person in the room because he knows he's got to get a record of decision for this project by March of 17 in order for us to be able to pay the bills of the consultants that he's got working for him. So if you see this gentleman, he looks a little nervous, it's okay. He's not on coffee, he just knows he has a very important deadline. But again, this is a very critical project in the sense that if we're ever to have high-speed rail as a network in Texas, the Dallas-Fort Worth area is going to be a critical linchpin in this whole project. It's going to be probably one of the first truly leveraged governmental P3s for high-speed rail, not like how California is doing it, but in a way that's more Texas-based. This is kind of like having ships sailing. What this effort is kind of like the Mayflower coming to America. It's something that hasn't been done, and we're in uncharted territory. And Chad's leading that effort, and he's going to be having a draft record of this draft EIS. Hopefully, when we're at this meeting this time next year, there'll be a draft environmental document out on the street. You're looking, huh? There better be, yeah, I know. Another thing that we've talked about in the past and kind of slowed down over the year because we're catching up on the Dallas-Fort Worth is the idea of the Texas-Oklahoma study on 35. And again, I've always told you I hated the name of that. So I think I don't know if Brian is out here or whatnot, but I'm thinking we're going to call this like when we go to the draft meetings, Empower 35. Because I think what we want to do is empower the residents, the local elected officials along the 35 corridor that there are options that could be had for passenger service. They're not options that the department is going to deliver, but ultimately we've done enough work to show the viability, feasibility of potentially high-speed rail in that corridor, but also other services that could be linked to with Amtrak. But it's going to be information in that EIS that the local communities, the region itself along 35 is going to have to embrace and take and leverage. Right? I love it. Finally, I think one of the things I wanted to talk about today is what we're doing in terms of the Heartland Flyer. As you all know, the Heartland Flyer is a joint effort by the state of Oklahoma and Texas. And we currently have one passenger trip a day back and forth between Oklahoma City and Fort Worth. How many of you have ever been on the Flyer? Okay, good number of you. It's the problem with the Heartland Flyer, it just doesn't work right. It's tapped out. We're level plateaued with about 70,000 or so annually people moving. And the state's having to pay an increasing burden. There was a federal law that was passed that was supposed to be helpful to states in setting costs with Amtrak and getting some truism. What it's really done is become a barrier for innovation. Amtrak is stuck with giving us rates and costs the same as if we were in Connecticut or if we were in Delaware or Maine. And that's not a true representation of cost or operating conditions that we have. It's not that Amtrak's a bad folks, they're just stuck with what is called poor operating legislation. Well, Texas pays about $2.5 million each year to subsidize that service. We're not going to be able to subsidize that service next year if operating conditions stay the same. We are not going to be able to sustain keeping one train a day moving with the cost process that Amtrak is stuck to. So what we're going to do, we've talked with Amtrak, we've also working with Oklahoma DOT, and first quarter of this year, we're going to put out a solicitation to look for innovative service delivery on the Heartland Flyer corridor. We're going to look for a private vendor to come and provide, at a minimum, the goal is having twice the amount of service for the same price. That's the benchmark that we as the states are going to put out to the public sector. And we think we're going to get some pretty good responses on that. So the other part of this facilitating is facilitating the discussion to get innovative options, get more cost-effective service available to the citizens of both Oklahoma and Texas. And I think you'll be seeing that as coming year, and I'm hopeful next year when we're up here talking about that we're talking about either a private operator now running that service or in the contractual process with an operator for service in the future. The other thing that discussion has led to, though, is that we've got great hope that some of our discussions with Amtrak is going to lead to better, improved long-range service. You know, Amtrak runs a lot of trains that are longer than 750 miles, and guess what? We as the state of Texas don't have to pay for those. So we've been very active in working with Amtrak to see about extending service from, say, New Orleans up into the Dallas-Fort Worth area and beyond. And those talks are being received very well. Indications from early revenue studies show that, surprise, Amtrak can make money if they provide more service to the Dallas-Fort Worth area and connect more parts of the country. So we're hopeful over the next year that we're going to be doing inspection trains, working with the host railroads to see if we can really define the feasibility of that and get improved long-range service into the Metroplex that would provide more service to our state with no cost to us as the state of Texas. All these things are great. This is kind of where we are. We're facilitating these things. But I think it's important to know that there's an important role for you as advocates, for the folks that are in the community. You know, one of the things I'm going to ask this question is interesting. I talked with our short line guys and I said, you know, you talk about the legislature and that they don't do anything for you. Say, how many of you have talked to them? And I get this kind of frosted glass look. So let me ask this question to everybody in the audience. How many of you know who your state representative and state senator is? All right, that's a pretty impressive. Now this is going to be the one that's key. How many of your state representatives and state senators know you personally? Herein lies the problem. If you don't have that relationship with your elected official on a personal basis, how do you ever expect to see things accomplished? Next year at this meeting, I want to see everybody's hand up and be able to answer that question. Because it's the key. You can't get anything done if you don't have an active participation in the process. Asking questions, talking with your legislators, telling them about things that you see, that you want to see done, is important, not just in transportation, but in any part of life. You know, I help my state rep get elected. I see him quite frequently, know him very well. You should too. Not that I ever ask him for anything, but one day I might. It's good to have that relationship. Much like in your business. Your business is based on relationship. Why wouldn't you have that same kind of relationship mentality with folks that are your elected officials? So you play an important role. You want to see different things happening. You want to see more services, different types of options. That is important. Because the other thing that happens with those relationships, we go back to my picture of the slide. Those guys pretty much know rail by that block crossing. They don't know or talk about how rail takes millions of cars off the road, how people are investing billions of dollars in the economy. They see bad transportation. We saw that in the last session of the legislature. There's some transportation project that goes through rural areas that all of a sudden the word rail was associated with something that was bad. And so eminent domain and other things come up out of that. But you got to be engaged in the process, and you know, it's just like anything at a local level. You know, land use discussions, anything like that. If you're not, you know, the more no's that are heard versus the casual yays that kind of go along, you got to have some engagement in that process. I think the other part of it, from a standpoint of advocacy and people in the community, are what are the things that really could help rail that aren't being done and discussed. You know, we talked with the short line folks yesterday. You know, a tax credit for investment at the state level makes a lot of sense. When you start doing tax incentives and credits for short line railroads, they can invest more in their infrastructure, they get more cars off the road, and there's usually a 3 or 4 time multiplier of that investment that is made. You know, having an infrastructure bank in Texas that would allow the use of and funding of multiple modes of transportation is something that would be very valuable to the state of Texas, but currently isn't in place. Being able to make sure that the Comprehensive Development Authority of the state, while it talks about it for rail, it's tied back into the highway side of things. You eliminate 6 words in the code, and you're able to do all kinds of innovative P3 projects without the uncertainty and risk of people saying, well, is it really legal or not? So there's lots of things that can be done, but it's going to take the advocacy, it's going to take grassroots, it's going to take having your legislator understand those sort of things in order for that to happen. So today, as we move forward, you hear presentations from short lines. You hear presentations about building the next generation private high-speed rail project in the state of Texas. Think about how you can help. Think about the things, and it's not overtly hard to do this. It's just making a relationship with someone, explaining the things that you know, that you care about to someone, and letting them understand that there's more to the story than what they're hearing now. So as I kind of get off the stage and get off my high horse here, you know, I think in the next year, get more engaged. Talk to your state legislator. Talk to our staff. They're here all day today. Mark Warner in the back of the room, head of planning. Gil Wilson, who you've already heard, head of operations, works with a lot of our freight rail. Those gentlemen are the doers. They get stuff done. They facilitate. They get with railroads. Pick their brains. Talk about things. Figure out strategies that work for you, your business, your communities, because these guys know the freight railroad industries. They work with them, and they're innovative thinkers, and they're not guys that are just going to go, well, that's a great idea, but I don't get paid enough to do that. Hard-working guys that get stuff done. So as we move through the conference today, think about that, challenging you to a homework assignment that next year, before the start of the legislature, the idea is 100% hands raised at those two questions. So with that, I will close today. I appreciate your time. I appreciate everybody being here. I hope sincerely that as we move forward in the coming year, everybody has good health and good fortune, and enjoy the day, enjoy the fellowship of this meeting. I want to thank Peter, Cody, great leader, and they're very hard to find in the world, folks that are willing to invest the time, invest resources, and invest the energy to do the things they do. So everybody, a round of applause for Peter, please. And now I can stop my presentation and everybody's clapping. So with that, thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of the conference.